Welcome to the Garde Arts Center in New London, Connecticut. This is a gubernatorial debate between Governor Dan Malloy and candidates Tom Foley and Joe Visconti. It's being presented by WNPR, CPTV, and The Day. I'm John Dankosky from WNPR's Where We Live. Joining me in asking questions tonight are Paul Schwanier from The Day and Harriet Jones of WNPR. Tonight's debate is a cumulative time debate, which means each candidate will have about 15 minutes of time to answer questions each. I'll be guiding the debate to make sure we get to a lot of topics and to make sure we get to the answers of the questions posed by my colleagues. There will be no breaks in this hour-long event. Each candidate will have a chance for closing statements. I would like to ask our crowd here at the Garde Arts Center to refrain from clapping or yelling or other outbursts during the debate, because we will give you plenty of time to clap at the end. Our first question comes from Paul Schwanier of The Day, and it goes to Tom Foley.
Good evening, Mr. Foley. You have criticized what you call Governor Malloy's corporate welfare policies, including a deal with United Technologies that was applauded by many in the business community. Yet you have voiced support for Connecticut Innovations, a program your running mate, Heather Summers, used to grow her business. So I was hoping tonight you could better define where you see the line is, where is it appropriate to offer government incentives and where it crosses the line to corporate welfare.
Very good question. Before I get started, I'd like to welcome my wife, Leslie, who's here, my running mate, Heather Summers. I'd like to welcome Joe Visconti. Thanks for being here tonight. And it's great being in New London and here in the 2nd Congressional District, which I'm very grateful I won by 7 points in the 2010 election. Corporate welfare, I object to because Governor Malloy has spent over $2 billion of taxpayers' money essentially paying companies to stay here who may or may not have been thinking about leaving. But one of the reasons why they're thinking about leaving is because he's raised taxes. He's made it more expensive to run a business here and to employ people. He's driven up everybody's electricity bills, for example. A lot of businesses use electricity, and if you raise their costs, it makes them less competitive. I support Connecticut Innovations and some of the business support programs that have been here for years, long before Governor Malloy got here, because they support small businesses and they provide credit and equity support for businesses that are small enough so they can't get that from traditional bank lending. I think that's a good thing if it's well managed and good credit decisions are being made, for example. But I don't support giving billions of taxpayer money, particularly given where our economy is, to large wealthy corporations to keep jobs here that these people would keep here if the policies of this governor weren't so anti-business. You can't be anti-business and pro-job. So what I would do as governor is I would make this a more business-friendly environment. I'd provide a lot more support for job creators. And I liken it to stepping on the brake and the accelerator at the same time. Governor Malloy, with his policies, is stepping on the brake. He's making it more expensive and more onerous for people who employ people in Connecticut. I would take my foot off the brake, and then you don't have to pay the bribes to the large, profitable corporations to keep jobs here.
Mr. Visconti?
Thank you, John. I'd like to thank the 10,000 Connecticut voters who signed a petition to get me on the stage here. I'd like to thank also my volunteers, my mother who's in the audience, my son Michael, sisters and brothers, the 2nd Congressional District in New London, and everyone who showed up here tonight. I'm an opponent of corporate welfare. This is how I entered politics. In West Hartford, where I'm from, an organization called Blueback Square was being developed in 2003. It was corporate cronyism to me because the development at the time was done without the bidding contract, where $48 million were used of the public treasury. And the bonds were sold without the obligation bonds being tied to the developer. 10 years later, I can report to you that last year, the developer, as I predicted, left America with all their holdings. They left the country with all their holdings and were never tied to the municipal bond obligations. So I begin my political career against corporate cronyism. Right now, the small business owner is the one that is having a hard time. I've been on the trail 18 months, over 18 months now, visiting thousands of small business owners. And for them, the anger is that the major corporations, who many are doing well in a flush, have been given what I saw happen in West Hartford. So I believe that we are not the Connecticut State Bank and Trust. We need to get our fiscal house in order. We need to take a look at the deficits that are coming up. We have $1.2 billion deficits in 2016, $1.5 billion in 2017, and $1.8 billion in 2018. And I have not heard that discussed on this stage, and this is why I'm here. We have 3 tidal waves coming. And this is with a built-in $300 million revenue stream coming in. So we have a hard time. It's not all the governor's fault for this, but it's his responsibility. And it's time we take a look at how are we going to manage our own house and get these our fiscal house in order, because if we don't and we look to be a bank and give corporations money we can't afford, small business owners deserve our support first, and they are looking for decreased regulation. They're looking also for the state to take a look at why the consumer doesn't have any money in their pockets, high electricity costs. Everyone in this room knows exactly what it costs. Again, it's not all the governor's fault, but again, it's his responsibility and the Democrat Party's responsibility. Right now, it lays at their doorstep. I'm running for governor because I want to deliver to you all the hardships that I've heard from people, whether they're in foreclosure, whether they're losing their home, whether they're getting their electric shut off, all the hardships that are happening. Again, I'll say 3 times, it isn't the governor's fault, all of it, but is his responsibility to get these things under control.
Governor Malloy?
I want to welcome you to the stage. It's good to have you. Mr. Foley, it's good to be with you once again. I do want to recognize my wife, Kathy. We've been married 32 years. My oldest son, Dan, is with us. And, of course, the best lieutenant governor that anyone could possibly have, Nancy Wyman, is also with us, and I want to thank her. So both of you have mentioned small business. So here's a shocker. Before Nancy and I were sworn into office, there were no state programs for small businesses. None. 0, zip. We created that tool. It's called the Small Business Express Program. And so far, it has helped 1,200 small businesses access capital, access operating dollars in exchange for keeping their jobs and enlarging their jobs. Total job numbers, over 15,000 as a result of that program. It didn't exist before we were sworn in. Now let's talk about United Technologies. United Technologies is important in every voting district in the state of Connecticut. It has direct employees and members of the supply chain. Let's remember what their CFO said to Wall Street 4 years ago, before our election. That CFO questioned why anyone would do business in Connecticut and why they were doing business in Connecticut. And here we are. They're about to invest $500 million in a new engineering center. They're about to upgrade their facilities near Bradley Airport, their facilities in Bridgeport, and their facilities in Stratford as well. That supply chain has now been told that they need to double their capacity and then triple their capacity. That's exciting news. But here's the most important thing. In just a few years, 18 months to 22 months, Connecticut will be making more jet engines in Connecticut, in Middletown, and in East Hartford than at any time since 1983. And you know what? A lot of those parts are made in this community and surrounding communities. That 75,000 person supply chain is New London, it's Norwich, and it's every community in this district.
Mr. Foley, very quickly, how would you have handled negotiations with UTC differently than the governor did?
With who?
With UTC, United Technologies.
Well, I'm not sure there was a need to handle negotiations. Listen, the idea of the governor and his staff negotiating with a very sophisticated group of business people, I'm a little worried for Connecticut taxpayers. United Technologies, $400 million of tax credits that were given, and this is a revenue that's going to be missing now, and the taxpayers are going to have to make up the deal. And not one job was connected to that deal. Now, one job was connected to capital expenditure, which doesn't necessarily mean jobs. And Governor, I'm surprised that you don't know that Connecticut Innovations and the Department of Economic and Community Development long preceded your being governor. And they have programs investing equity and providing credit for small businesses. So you didn't create these programs. And listen, we've lost 3,600 jobs in August. We lost 10,000 jobs in January. This governor is sitting here talking about having given away hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars supposedly to create jobs. But it isn't working, Governor. The economy has only grown 1% while Governor Malloy's been governor. 3.5 years. It may be the worst performing economy in the country. It simply hasn't worked, sir. You've said a lot of things you've done, and you've given a lot of money away, but you have no results to show for it.
Governor Malloy, do you have a quick response?
Sure. 60,000 private sector jobs have been created since Nancy and I were sworn in, after we inherited a state that hadn't grown a net new job in 22 years. The Small Business Express program is a brand new program. and in point of fact has helped 1,200 companies. But this is interesting. Tom says that in one breath we've spent $2 billion. That's a made-up number. In another breath he says a couple of $100 million. This is what UTC was about. It was about keeping our largest employer and our largest supply chain in Connecticut. But you know what dollars they'll spend? They'll spend the dollars that they earned under Republican governors. Under Republican governors. And we won't have to bond anything. We won't have to borrow anything. And in point of fact, it will bring thousands of jobs to Connecticut. When we're building more engines than at any time since 1983. That's change, folks. That's what competition looks like, and that's who we are.
Joe Visconti, do you have a quick thought?
I'm absolutely against corporate cronies and corporate welfare, especially to United Technologies, a major multi-billion-dollar corporation. Everyone at home that's having a hard time, they may have to leave the state of Connecticut because they can't afford to live here, doesn't care about UTC. There are people who care about UTC, but the state of Connecticut has to take a look at the tidal waves of deficits that are coming and not be the Connecticut State Bank and Trust. We can't do it. UTC could have stayed here. They weren't going to go anywhere. Just the brownfield cleanups on their property would have been enough to keep them here.